Are there any non-woke operating systems? Are there any ways to power a computer that are not run by extraordinarily racist, sexist, woke organizations and individuals? I get this question probably more than any other over the last year. And the reality is, the answer kind of sucks. I'm just going to brace y'all for it. The answer is, I mean, there are, but there's not a lot of choices because most operating systems, most companies, foundations, organizations, and individuals building operating systems and the core components therein are extraordinarily woke right now. That's just the reality of the situation. I'm just going to walk you through a couple of the obvious bits. So let's start with Microsoft, right? Microsoft is the king of desktop computer operating systems. Windows is on more laptops and desktops than any other OS. And the reality is, Microsoft is astoundingly woke. Crazy woke. You may have heard earlier this year there was this big news story that everyone ran with that Microsoft was firing and laying off all of their DEI teams and whatnot. And that story was just bupkis. It was basically made up nothingness. And what the reality is, Microsoft is investing huge amounts of money into DEI and woke teams, including the research department, Microsoft Research, focusing on pronouns. That's right. Not operating system kernels, not new types of hypervisors and programming languages. No, they're putting their money into pronouns. And that sounds ridiculous because it really, really is. And then roughly a year ago, almost to the day, the Lunduke Journal broke a big story about how Microsoft had paid for this big study and this massive amount of resources to help their employees transition their 3-year-olds to different genders. It's not a joke. It's not an exaggeration. They literally have resources inside Microsoft to encourage and assist parents, employees of Microsoft, to take their toddlers and make their little Steves into little Sarahs. It's crazy, and it is the most extreme example of wokeism as you can get. So Microsoft Windows, well, that's straight out. You might as well toss it in the dustbin as far as wokeness is concerned. And then there's Apple. Now, there are many ways in which Apple is not as woke as some companies and some organizations. So if you're really wanting to split hairs and say, okay, is Apple or Microsoft more woke? I would say arguably Microsoft is more woke because near as I can tell, Apple doesn't have a internal program to help 3-year-olds get sex change operations. That's crazy. However, Apple's pretty gosh darn woke. I mean, back during the BLM riots that rocked the whole country, there was a period of time where the Antifa and BLM organizers continually ransacked the Apple store in downtown Portland, Oregon, right? It's this big store with just tons of glass. It's glass all the way around. And they broke that glass and they robbed the store, and all in the name of racial justice, right? Because somehow that accomplishes racial justice when you break a bunch of computer store windows. Well, how did Apple respond to that? They responded by putting up a barrier around the store, turning it into a mural for some of the criminals who were at the center of the BLM riots, including a giant "I can't breathe" bit of artwork on it, and then donating that to a collective and making a big deal about how they supported BLM during that whole process. And it was crazy. They were being attacked by BLM rioters, and while they were also praising BLM, it was insane. It was absolutely insane. And that's not where it stops, because it's not just one instance with Apple. Apple also has examples, several examples, where they have racist hiring and firing policies inside their organization, where they encourage people to hire people who aren't white, because white is a very bad, evil color, right? So Apple, like so many companies, is very, very woke. So let's toss out iOS and macOS and iPadOS. Let's just toss it out. Okay, it's too woke. So if we're using non-wokeness as a deciding factor for using an operating system, we can't use anything by Apple. Okay, fine. Well, now that we're talking about the discrimination of hiring and firing people based on skin color all around DEI and woke policies, well, that means we've also got to rule out Google and Intel and IBM and Red Hat and so many others. But as soon as we rule out Google, well, that means Android is out and Chrome OS is out. Well, those are just out. Okay, so now we've lost Windows, we've lost Mac OS, we've lost Chrome OS and Android and iOS. We're running out of mainstream operating systems here. So Linux is our last best hope, right? Well, unfortunately, pretty much all of Linux is crazy, crazy woke at this point. Red Hat, one of the longest running Linux companies, and indisputably the most financially successful Linux companies, one that contributed huge amount to Linux, the Linux kernel, Linux subsystems, Linux wireless networking, the desktops, all of it. They are crazy woke, off the charts woke, so woke that there are multiple lawsuits happening against Red Hat and their parent company IBM this year, thanks in part to the reporting from the Lunduke Journal about their crazy racist hiring practices. They actually held conferences, little training seminars with PowerPoint presentations to train their employees on how to fight against white people and how to tell white people how evil they are. I mean, Red Hat's crazy woke. But that's not the only part of Linux that's woke. The Linux Foundation, the organization that employs the founder of Linux, that rules over all of Linux kerneldom, they actually, several years back, this is how, just to show you how far back this goes, started banning people for wearing a Trump hat, for wearing one of those red MAGA hats. That's right. They said a prominent developer couldn't go to one of their Linux conferences because someone had a picture of him wearing a red MAGA hat. Right? So you get banned from being involved in Linux simply by voting for the wrong person or having the mistake of having yourself pictured in a way that would suggest you voted for the wrong person. And that's the very core of Linux. That's the kernel itself. Then there's Debian. Debian has a whole program where they work with an organization called Outreachy to bring in interns for anyone who's not a straight white man. Anyone who's not a straight white man. So Debian has made it very clear they want everyone to come in and help work on and be a part of Debian Linux, unless you're a straight white man. This list goes on and on. OpenSUSE, one of the longest running Linux distributions in the world, literally went on a nonstop banning of anyone they thought might be conservative, including yours truly, because I'm outwardly conservative, and I used to sit on their board of directors. Well, they made it so I'm not even allowed to touch their mailing lists anymore. Or Nix OS, one of the rising stars recently in the Linux world, they had a purge of anyone who seemed a little too conservative. Elementary OS, which once seemed like it was going to be this amazing beacon of awesome design of Linux distributions and Linux-based operating systems, has declared that they are, quote, the DEI Linux distro. And it goes on and on and on. The reality is, if you want to be free from wokeness, there's no option for Linux. There's no way to get to use Linux and be completely free from wokeness currently. It doesn't matter what you or I think about that. That's just the reality of the situation. So here's where we're at right now. If you're keeping track at home, The woke operating systems includes anything that's Linux, right? Because the Linux kernel, super woke. Most package managers, desktop environments, everything crazy woke. GNOME, the GNOME desktop environment, crazy woke. All of it's woke. All of Linux is woke. With very, very, very few little piecemeal exceptions, and it's almost impossible to piece it together. All of Microsoft's current offerings are woke. So current Microsoft Windows, woke. Apple's macOS and iOS over the last several years, woke. Google's Chrome OS and Android, well, both of those are Linux based, so it falls under the all Linux category, but it's still worth calling out here separately because they're big enough by themselves. Very, very woke. What's left? Right? So when you start doing that, you've at that point ruled out all of the mainstream operating systems, all of them, every single one. They're all ruled out. They're all super woke without exception. So what do we have left? Well, there are a few things we have left. Not much, but a few. The first is OpenBSD. OpenBSD is a Unix-like operating system. It is not hugely popular, but they do have some projects that are in use all over the place, including OpenSSL and things like that. But OpenBSD is somewhat unique among operating systems in that they stick to rather fiercely a politics-free environment, right? They quote, one of their project goals is be as politics-free as possible. And they do stick to that, right? Every now and then you'll see some OpenBSD contributor be a little political one way or the other, but by and large, the project stays politics free. So I think you can safely call OpenBSD a non-woke operating system. I don't know that it's anti-woke, it's just not political, which is great. In my opinion, that's great because I don't care about the politics of who's running an operating system. I care about whether or not they use those politics against people, right? Because when I look at Microsoft and Apple and Google and all of the Linux and Linux Foundation related stuff, the issue there is not that the people in charge happen to vote a particular way. The issue is that they take political ideas, things that we would define as very extremist, DEI, woke, extreme left stuff, and they use that as a weapon against people, right? They hiring and firing processes, banning people from projects and the like, and hurting small children in the process. That's when I have to say, okay, those are woke companies and operating systems, not because of who they voted for, but not because of their personal politics, but because of how they've weaponized those woke ideals to harm us and other people, right? OpenBSD hasn't done that. OpenBSD does not go around weaponizing politics in order to hurt other people. I don't even know. There's a lot of contributors to the OpenBSD project. I know of what the politics are of like two of them. The rest of them I haven't a clue, and I like that. They could all disagree with me for all I care. I could still happily say they're a non-woke system, even if they disagree with me on almost everything politically, and I like that a lot. So what does that mean? For the non-woke operating systems, really your options come down to this: OpenBSD, or retro operating systems, meaning operating systems that are pre-woke. And sure, there are many of those operating systems, like let's say OS2 or Amiga OS or even MS-DOS or PC-DOS and so many others, where the individuals developing them or the CEOs in charge of those companies, they may have had politics at the time that may have been more in line with woke politics. In fact, some of those individuals may still be in charge of companies today and may be super woke today. But if you want to be free from the wokeness, you got to kind of go back to before that was a major problem, right? And so I think that many retro operating systems are viable in that way, including operating systems from Apple and Microsoft. Apple and Microsoft, I've disagreed with their politics many times for the last, 40 years. but I think you can safely say Pre the woke craziness, that wasn't an issue there. They were pre-woke if you go back far enough. So let's say you want to run Windows 98. Okay, all right. You want to run OS2 Warp 3. No, all right. All right, you want to go run an old version of Unix like HPUX or Solaris. I think you can safely do that and feel comfortable that you're using a non-woke system. But the reality is, if you use wokeness as a deciding factor over what systems you will or won't use, you are going to rule out all of the major operating systems and a large portion of even the hobbyist ones. A good example, and one that I particularly like, is Haiku. Haiku is an operating system based on BOS. It's a free re-implementation of BOS, and it's a good system. It's fun to use, it's got great performance, and it's got a lot going for it. But they also exclude people if the people seem anti-woke, right? So if you are publicly against woke or DEI politics, you are excluded from Haiku. That's that they've made that statement to me repeatedly, and I take them at face value on that. And so I would have to put Haiku in that woke bucket. And that to me is sad. And I think there's multiple hobbyist operating systems that fall into that category nowadays, and that's a massive bummer. So, but you've got OpenBSD, and I think Serenity OS is still sits in the non-political basket, but otherwise, I think you're looking at retro operating systems. You just have to rule out using anything modern. That's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous how much control those with such extremist views, the DEI woke hard extremism, have control over the vast majority of computer operating systems today. But it really is the reality of the world we live in. So anyway, it's one of the questions I get the most, and I don't have a happy or good answer for anyone on what systems to use, because if this were just one system, if it was just Microsoft, right? If Microsoft was just the crazy woke one, I could be like, well, okay, great. We'll use Apple, or we use Linux, or we use something from Google. But no, it's Microsoft, it's Apple, it's Google, it's everything Linux. And I'm like, okay, well, shoot, we just ruled out 99.4% of all operating systems. Okay, it makes it difficult to, on a purely ideological basis, choose an operating system that doesn't hate you, right? Because I think me and many of you would like to think that we sit down at our computers, laptops, desktops, handhelds, whatever, and use it and think, you know what, the people that made this operating system, they may not like me, but at least they don't actively hate me. They aren't seeking to exclude me and discriminate against me, because that feels yucky, right? We'd like to think, I would love to think that they like me, but at the very least that they don't hate me. But when I look at the list of Woco operating systems, Linux, Windows, Mac OS, everything from Google, if you are not hard extreme leftist, they hate you. That's just all there is to it. But I mean, me personally, I have a Mac OS device. I have an Android device. I have several Linux devices. All of the computers around me, with a few exceptions, are running operating systems that would fully fit into that woke operating system category. And that does kind of bum me out a little bit. Makes me kind of want to just use old retro machines. Anyway, it's a great question. I get this one regularly, and it's one that we're going to have to revisit more often than not as the course of the next year or two flows along, because this is a major problem in so many ways, and I know a lot of people are wrestling with it. So good question. Go over to lunduke.com, click on all the links for different ways to watch, listen, read everything that I put out from the Lunduke Journal. It's all there at lunduke.com. And I want to say this straight up: if you work for a big tech corporation, if you work for a software foundation, if you are simply heavily involved in an open source project and you see weird stuff happening, Go to lunduke.com and click on the Become a Tech Whistleblower link. Whistleblow. Leak. Get that information out there, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you want to keep yourself completely anonymous, I can work with you on that. I walk you through in that link how to set up anonymous email accounts, send me files in very anonymous, secure ways, and we'll try and make sure any metadata and personally identifying information from screenshots, documents, and the like that you may share with me get scrubbed before publication. But realistically, sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you see weird stuff going on, not just woke and DEI things, but anything that makes you go, wait, this shouldn't be happening, blow that whistle, man. Blow the whistle, and we'll help you report on it. And thank you to all the subscribers for help making it possible. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across this whole gosh darn inner tube, I do declare, end broadcast.